Hi everyone, I'm Cheyenne and welcome to my channel. So in this video, I want to give you guys 9 practical study tips that actually work. This is based off of a blog post that I wrote on my website studyingalways.com, and I wanted to share it and expand more on some tips that you can use. So without further ado, let's get straight into this video. So the first study tip is learning to understand. Learning to understand is essentially how you study smarter and not harder, because it's not about how long you study, but how you study. Learning to understand is like cracking the code to a subject that you're studying. It's a very strategic way to absorb the material that you learn and process the information. I've realized that the classes that I did the best in were the ones where I actually understood the coursework and the material. So you learn to understand by diving deep and looking at the bigger picture of your subject. For example, one of the subjects that I love to study is Japanese. When I learn about grammar, I try to understand the sentence structure. What I've come to understand so far is that the verb goes at the end of the sentence. So whenever I try to form a sentence in Japanese, I know that whatever verb I use will go at the end. This method may require doing additional research on your subject, especially if you struggle to understand the topic. But you can also go to your teacher's or professor's office hours to help you understand. If you have a textbook assigned to your class, going above and beyond and reading the extra parts that are not required help you find some hidden gems. So number 2 is rewriting your notes. If you're trying to grasp difficult and dense material, this study method will definitely work for you. It's helpful to rewrite your notes at least once. I would recommend having 3 copies of your notes. One would be the original one, the second would be typed, and the third would be another written one. By doing this can help you recall the information that you're learning. This tip is also great because it helps you learn at your own pace. So number 3 is reading your notes after class. Now I'm not gonna lie guys, I don't always read my notes after class, and I've noticed that my grades would suffer or I didn't reach my full potential by not doing this, and that's why this study method is so important, because it can really make a difference between a B or an A. Implementing this study method is pretty simple. I would recommend spending at least 10 minutes reading over your notes every day. This also ties into learning to understand, because the more you read over your notes, the more you'll actually understand the material that you're learning. So tip number 4 is to simplify your notes. Now this is another study method that goes well with learning to understand, because again, you have to dig deep and find the bigger picture of what you're learning. So I'll use Japanese as another example. Instead of just trying to memorize each new sentence that I learn, I can just use a simple formula like subject plus object plus verb. Now obviously outside of school, things are not so simple and there are a lot of nuances and exceptions to the rule, but when it comes to studying for a test or a final, this method really works. Now let's move on to tip number 5, which is to do the quiz/test questions and answers in your textbook. A lot of students forget to use their textbook to its full potential. I was definitely one of those students who failed to make the most out of my textbook. For the most part, textbooks usually have test or quiz questions that you can use to help you study. This method is essential for quiz and test heavy classes. Another way that you can utilize your textbook is by using tip number 6, which is to read and annotate in your textbook. If you really want to get the most out of your textbook, annotating what you read is one of the best ways to do it. This method goes along with simplifying your notes, because you have to apply the same method of taking out the complex parts of what you're learning. Also, when you have a lot of information thrown at you in your textbook, you should try to simplify it in just a few words. You can also annotate by putting what you've learned into your own words if the paragraphs are too complex. I would recommend annotating each paragraph, or at least the most important paragraphs. This method helps a lot for writing essays. Now let's move on to tip number 7, which is using index cards. Index cards is the classic way of studying. This method is suitable for classes where you have to do a lot of memorizing. Index cards are more useful for when you're studying vocabulary words. Even though I use traditional index cards, I actually prefer digital index cards like Quizlet or Anki. This study method was a lifesaver for one of my psychology classes because there was a lot of terms that I had to memorize. I also love using Quizlet for when I study Japanese because there are so many vocabulary words to learn. So, tip number 8 is using charts, tables, or mind maps. I feel like this is one of the most underrated study methods. If you're more of a visual learner, then this study method is definitely for you. I've noticed that when my professors would use charts, tables, or mind maps in their lessons, I would digest the information better. This method is pretty simple and kind of fun because you get to draw diagrams and charts. Now, if you're not the best at drawing, then you can use templates like Canva or Microsoft Word. Now let's go to our final tip, which is to make a study cheat sheet. So instead of cramming for a test by flipping through your notes, it's best to make a study cheat sheet instead. A study cheat sheet is essentially a paper or a document with the most important topics you learned. It's a summary of everything you learned during your course. When you make a study cheat sheet, you're summarizing the entire semester of material. Now, this may seem kind of complicated, but if you implement the other 8 study methods, then it won't be so hard. It'll actually be pretty simple. You're basically putting all of the key points onto 1 or 2 pages. You should definitely try not to use more than 2 pages because that kind of defeats the purpose of summarizing everything. So when you make your cheat sheet, you first start out by making a document that outlines the class lectures. Then you would make headings for each topic that will be covered for the exam. If you're unsure about the topics for the final, I would suggest reaching out to a teacher or a professor for more clarity. Then you would write a summary or have bullet points under each topic headline. This method really helps with recalling topics that you've learned throughout the semester. So those are all of the tips that I have for you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video and let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more. And also don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!